Teste.
Aparece. Tá no ar, mesmo.
Não, mas é porque tem luz.
Não, but see, no, por que você abriu mais? Funcionou.
Então, para ver se
É só isso. Hello, everyone. We are having oh, 1 second. Hi, everyone. We'll be restarting in a couple of minutes. We're just finishing up the translation and everything on Zoom.
Me falta é a cabine só.
On va juste attendre l'interprétation. On commence.
Não ainda a cabine. Então vai chegar.
So this is an invitation for everyone who wants to join the struggle to find colonial legacy that persists until today. This is the video. You're gonna have a little QR code at the end that you can check, and I also have some more information here. Então, esse é um vídeo no final vai ter um QR Code que dá para escanear, mas eu também tenho um documento aqui que para poder pegar mais informações. É algo bem resumido, não faz parte do evento oficial, a gente está aqui como colaborador, e, enfim, é um prazer poder estar aqui, tá bom? Muito obrigada, pessoal.
aqui. Bom, pessoal, muito obrigada. Muito obrigada por, enfim, estarem aqui, né? Infelizmente, a nossa tradução para o português teve um probleminha, mas eu espero que vocês consigam entender agora. Eu vou fazer a abertura, né, da mesa em português, certo? Eu só precisaria da ordem. A ordem vai ser primeiro Inga, depois... Certo? Vai ser Inga, Justin e Beatriz? A gente começa primeiro com a pessoa que está online ou a pessoa que está na mesa? A gente vai começar aqui. Hello, Inga.
Hi.
Hello. So we're going to start now with Inga. Well, um segundo. Alguém pode confirmar se a tradução para o português está funcionando? Is it working, the translation to Portuguese? Yes. So I'm going to be testing here so you can see if the translation is working. Now it started to work, the Portuguese one. That's amazing. And the French one, let's see. Vamos ver se a tradução para o francês está funcionando. The French translation is working. Just for a second before I introduce our amazing panelists.
Allow me to say that as our colleague, Monica Goodman, yes, personal problems. Gabriela is going to share the session. Como nuestra colega de Mónica Goodman, vai estar aqui para a gente. Ela Gabriela sabe está muy generosamente dispuesta a ser una comunidad, una mediadora.
Sim, exato. Bom, as the Portuguese translation is working, I'm going to do the introduction in English, right? So Inga Solti is going to talk about the Ukraine war, catalyst for a new bloc confrontation. Basically what he's saying is that the war in Ukraine is giving birth to a renaissance of American power in a new asymmetrical transatlanticism based on a fourfold dependence of a significantly weakened and gradually deindustrialized North/Western European on the US, which severely restricts the EU's capacity for strategic autonomy and limits the EU, the European Union, ability to uphold the principles of multilateralism, from which especially the export-oriented EU member states who depend equally on the US and China as export markets benefit. Inga Solti from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Should I use the microphone? Yeah. Is this on? Yes. So, yes, I think so. Or isn't it? Wait. No, it's not. I just heard myself quite loudly and I thought.
See,
As long as
I think you can use this mic.
Okay.
Yes.
as long as you speak,
Yes. As long as you speak like
Yeah.
loud,
All right.
they
Okay.
can hear.
then you won't have the translation.
Well, it's well, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm very interested in this exchange because I think, as I said earlier, that the world is changing and the relationships of forces in this world are changing, but there are actors in this world that are trying to keep the world as it is and the power relations as they are. As you know, empires tend to be tend to know, be ignorant about what is going on in the world. Tend to be ignorant when it comes to what is going on in the world. Shortly before I came to Brazil, I was in China, and it was about the eco-civilization attempts in China, the various provinces. They took us to a province in which eco-civilization plays a key role. And there were lots of comrades from Malaysia, from Pakistan, from India, from Africa, and from Oceania, like from the Fiji Islands, etc. And it was very remarkable to observe like the degree of South-South cooperation, that it's no longer the hub and spoke system, that everything is focused around Europe, even if Aziz had to travel to Brazil via Europe. But in other respects, this is no longer the case. And the degree of European and Western ignorance is just striking. Like the Chinese, for instance, when you were just introducing the decolonization center, that the Chinese were very upset when the German Minister of Foreign Affairs came to China and said she wasn't here to speak about the past. She was here to speak about the present, and with no sense of what colonialism actually meant to China and the global South. And I just want to just mention that the idea of decolonization is actually now being implemented by the West against China and against Russia. Like you will find those maps to decolonize Russia as if that is the imperialism. And they are happy to talk about imperialism now, as long as it's about Russia and as long as it's about China's role in Africa and elsewhere in Latin America. But, and they do it in the language of post-colonialism, which I find outrageous in a way. So my argument is, the main thesis is that the Ukraine war is a catalyst for a new bloc confrontation. It's not without an alternative. In the previous 3 decades. I mean, when it was about the demilitarization of Ukraine, this was just, in my view, an echo of the weapons of mass destruction that George W. Bush sought to find in Iraq. When it was about the responsibility to protect or to prevent a genocide in eastern Ukraine, I think that was just an echo of this whole discourse around responsibility to protect the Kosovo Albanians against the Serbs, or the Libyans in eastern Libya against Gaddafi in 2011. So that was, in my view, just an echo. But it is not just an invasion by the Russian state, it is also a proxy war, and it has been for a long time. One would have to argue at least since 2014, probably since 1991. And it is also, and it emerged from a civil war because Russia and the European states and the US were tearing at Ukraine and were essentially tearing apart the country. And that war has now entered a new phase, a war of fixed positions and a war of attrition, in which up to 1,000 soldiers die on every side every day. And a war that cannot be won, because that's one of the 4 truths about the Ukraine war. It does have a prehistory that few people dare to talk about anymore in Europe and in the West. You immediately call a Putinist and a relativist or something even worse. The second truth is that it can't be won. Like even in foreign affairs in the West, like it's increasingly noted that war cannot be won militarily. It has the third truth. It has a tremendous degree of escalation, not so much because of what Putin or the Russian state might do if it were to be pushed into a corner, but because of the logic of the war, of the arms deliveries itself, because the numerical superiority of Russia, it means that eventually the NATO will have to be drawn into this war, because the Ukraine forces will lack the manpower to essentially utilize and use the weapons that the West is sending. So there's a tremendous element of escalation in it. And also that the fourth inconvenient truth is that there's the war is probably going to end with similar front lines and border lines than there are now, or like the border lines are going to look very similar to the front line now. And the question is whether thousands of workers on both sides ought to die before that happens, or if it can happen earlier. The US is heavily involved. I mean, if you look at the way the war is broadcasted, there is more media coverage of that war in the West compared to any of the wars of the West in the previous years and decades. Like there was no such coverage on Afghanistan, on Iraq, on Kosovo, etc., etc. So there's heavy involvement also in terms of military spending. The military spending in Ukraine is higher than the average spend on Afghanistan by the United States. You could say, well, the Western media will say it's about morality. It's if a country is attacked by an aggressor, it has according to the United Nations Charter, it has the right to defend itself, and if it can't, we must provide them with weapons so that they can, seize that right to defend themselves. Obviously, that argument runs into severe hypocrisies. We don't have to go back to the Monroe Doctrine, which everyone knows in Latin America, not even to the Cuban crisis. I mean, where it was totally unacceptable that Cuba, a sovereign state, was deciding to military join up with the Soviet Union. But we can even go back to the war itself, because shortly before the war, after the war had started, the US threatened the Solomon Islands in the West Pacific with war because it had democratically, as a sovereign state, agreed upon having a Chinese military base on the island. So it's not about morality, it's about interests. And the question is what kind of interests these are and how they relate to a new bloc confrontation. One might think that the US is involuntarily being drawn back into European affairs because Obama had declared the pivot to Asia in 2011. Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State back then, said it was the America's Pacific century, the 21st century. So why is the US suddenly so involved in Europe again? Isn't this against the pivot to Asia? My thesis is that the war in Ukraine cannot be understood without the US-China rivalry, and that the war itself is key to the way in which the US is trying to maintain supremacy vis-a-vis China. China is a historical challenge for the US, as you all know. Like the global GDP share of the US has declined, smaller than China, quite significantly smaller than China. And like the US would have to integrate China into a Western-dominated capitalist world in the same way that Western Germany, Japan, or South Korea were integrated into the American empire, but that was at the height of American power. It was, and they were significantly smaller economies, smaller populations, and they were militarily defeated and were no longer sovereign states. China, on the opposite, is a civilization 5,000 years old. It sees itself in a process of rejuvenation. It sees itself as being only marginalized by the West through colonialism for 200 years, but now returning to its traditional state in the world. It has 4 times as many people as the United States, and so on and so forth. So it's for the US, it's a historical challenge for which there is no precedent. And the question is how the US as a declining empire can maintain its hegemony against China. an understanding is that the West realized long before the global financial crisis that China was a threat or could threaten the US. I mean, even George W. Bush, China wasn't part of the axis of evil, but China was part of, like Bush tried to construct a global, a small NATO against China with Australia and India and Japan. So China was, after its WTO membership, was on the radar of the West, but only ever since the global financial crisis, it became clear how much China is a high-tech rival of the West, rivaling it in artificial intelligence, 5G, 6G, green technologies from wind turbines, solar panels to high-speed rail, e-mobility and so on and so forth, with integrated production lines that we visited also in China. It's really tremendous how independent that economy is increasingly getting. So it's a real challenge. So far, I wrote a study called The Coming War Against China in 2020, and I argued China was hyper-competitive vis-a-vis the US and vis-a-vis the West and its austerity exit strategy from the global financial crisis. That development was superior to austerity, and that therefore the West had to either emulate China's state interventionism or rein it in, contain it with all means military and non-military necessary. And so far, all US strategies to contain China have failed. I mean, Bush tried to control global oil reserves in Iraq. That failed because of the destruction of the Iraq state. Slower. That failed because of the destruction of the Iraq state. The second strategy was Obama's strategy, which was, in my view, a maritime blockade. So controlling the South China Sea, politicizing the Taiwan issues, politicizing the everything with the Philippines, Japan, etc. And that failed essentially because of China's trade routes onto the Eurasian landmass. And it failed because China established the Pakistan route to a Pakistan sea passage. And so in comes Trump's microchip war, but that, which Biden continues, but that is also questionable whether it will suffice, because China cannot produce true 4 to 5 nanometer chips, but it can flood the entire West with like super cheap electric cars and with 2018 nanometer technology. So even there, it's quite tricky. So my argument is that the US depends on the transatlantic division of labor. They know they can't contain China and control the world without Europe. And the Ukraine war is how that transatlantic division of labor is coming about. Because you will remember that Europe, once Brexit happened, once Trump was elected, there was all this talk about a strategic autonomy of Europe, which was autonomous from the US. It was already at the time part and parcel of demands from the US for Europe to militarize, to increase military spending. So the term is toxic and contaminated. Nonetheless, there were those attempts to become somewhat more independent, also militarily, from the US. And you remember Emmanuel Macron called the NATO clinically dead in 2009. So like there was at least a rift in the transatlantic relationship as a result of Trump. And the Ukraine war is essentially paving over that rift. And it does so, and it also weakens the potentials for Europe to have an independent position from the US. If you just take Germany as a dominant actor in Europe, there's now a fourfold dependence on the US. First, energy political, because now it's replacing cheap under market value, world market value traded energy from Russia with especially 80% of all terminals, LNG terminals, are fracking gas from the United States. As a result, energy prices in Germany are 3 times as high as they are, 3 times higher as they are in the US. 7 times higher than they are in China. So it's an energy dependence on more expensive energy influx from the US. It weakens, obviously, competitiveness of transnational corporations inside Europe, inside Western Europe. And because the US is trying to use the Ukraine war to couple Europe from China, that obviously means increasing dependence on domestic market in the United States. The US have since always used its domestic market as leverage to enforce market liberalization and et cetera, et cetera. So there's an energy political dependence, an economic dependence. There's a geopolitical dependence, because if there is a new Cold War, we all know who the most important actor, the one that has 800 military bases around the world and the biggest military. And fourth, because Europe is now militarizing, partly to also refill the arsenals empty to Ukraine. So you can't really be against, or you can't be for sending arms and be against militarization, because they belong together. But so because like that military spending is a stimulus program for the US, the 5 biggest military corporations are American. And I looked at it like not only what already is being spent, but what is supposed to be spent, what is already negotiated for the upcoming years. And pretty much half of that is like going to the US and funding Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and so on and so forth. And since we know the connection between military spending and technological innovation, like dual use, that means it is also increasing the gap technologically between the US and Western Europe. So we have this fourfold dependence of Western Europe on the United States. And I think one can, like the result of that politically will be that something like Gerhard Schröder in 2003 will no longer be possible, by which I mean a German chancellor not participating in a war wanted by the United States empire will no longer be possible because of that dependence on the United States. And remember, even German state opposed the Libya war. It didn't want to partake in the Libya war. So a new bloc confrontation is likely, even though there is a conflict of interest between the US and Western Europe, in my view, because the US is the sole winner of the war. I mean, Western Europe has the inflation problem. It's big even in rich countries like Germany. More than 30% have live from paycheck to paycheck. They have no savings. More than 60% spend their entire income per month. And this is in Germany, a rich country. Like in Southern Europe, it's much worse. And Africa is like, feeling the inflation without any obstructions. So there is, we risk state fail, like conflicts in Africa that, distributional conflicts that turn ethnic, that turn confessional, that bleed out refugees and so on and so forth. So there must be an interest in stopping that war to restabilize societies. But nonetheless, Europe is like going hand in hand with the US. We could talk long about the reasons for that, but since it's also about alternatives, I think it's important to know that I think the top priority for socialist politics today is to prevent that new bloc confrontation, because as Engels said in his testimony, conditions for socialist struggles, labor struggles are good as long as world peace is maintained. But if a new bloc confrontation were to happen, obviously this is going to be to the detriment of labor rights, civic rights, freedom rights, and also climate justice and democracy, etc. Countries will become less liberal, more authoritarian as a result. And so I think that peace and a new detente politics is a precondition to socialist struggles. And that also can reunite then, I think, the gap between state politics and social movement politics, because they are so intricately connected in that regard. And of course, it's a new detente politics would not be radical. It's radical in the light of how power relations are today, but it is, I think, the only hope that we have to prevent the climate catastrophe from escalating and to allow us some leeway for socialist struggles. Thank you very much.
I think we can stay if you want. So for the debate after.
Okay, I'll come back.
Okay, it's okay. So right now we're gonna. Justin haven't arrived yet in the room. Então o Justin, que é o próximo painelista, ainda não chegou na sala, right? So I'm gonna introduce someone we all know. One of the great hosts of today's event, Beatriz Bício. Basically, Beatriz Bício is the Vice Director of the Institute of Philosophy and Social Sciences of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Is the Associate Professor in the Postgraduate Program in Comparative History in the Department of Political Science. Is also the editor and later director of the Third World magazine, Cadernos do Terceiro Mundo. Welcome, Beatriz.
Thank you, dear Gabriela. Eu vou falar em português, já que temos outro querido ex-aluno na tradução.
Exato.
Né? Então, vamos aproveitar essa nova geração potente, solidária, presente, que está aqui nos ajudando. É muito importante a mensagem que nos traz Engá, né? Do que está acontecendo na Europa, né? E muito do que ele nos traz tem a ver com algumas reflexões que eu vou dividir com vocês, né? Por um lado, e para não ficar somente num tom assim mais pessimista, vamos lembrar que também a guerra na Ucrânia e outros episódios contemporâneos tem nos permitido observar, e penso no Brasil do governo atual, penso em vários governos africanos, né? Uma decisão de trabalhar uma postura que poderíamos chamar soberana, né? Ou podemos dizer uma postura não alinhada, a priori, né? Com determinações vindas, no caso especificamente, e pensando no cenário macro da guerra dos Estados Unidos, né? Pretendendo um alinhamento acrítico de países africanos, de América Latina, a política que desenvolve em relação à guerra e, por exemplo, por tomar um exemplo, as sanções, né, contra a Rússia, né? Nós temos visto um posicionamento muito interessante, né, de não atender essas pressões, que não são somente lineamentos, né, são pressões concretas, e têm sido resistidas, entendendo que não é esse o interesse nacional, regional, de, por exemplo, e tomando mais uma vez o caso da África, né? Ou seja, isso, por um lado, é alentador, né? Porque eu venho sempre trabalhando muito com meus alunos, e não somente no legado da Conferência de Bandung, do movimento não alinhado, né? E essa atitude traz uma lembranças, né, do que foi a postura, naquele momento dos anos 60, dos anos 70, desse movimento, né? E eu acho que volta a ser interessante lembrar a frase de Leopold Senghor, que em algum momento posterior à Conferência de Bandung, ele definiu que esse momento, em 1955, com aquela reunião de chefes de Estado, que foi a mais importante, fora a própria Assembleia Geral da ONU, foi a morte do complexo de inferioridade, né? E a decisão do terceiro mundo, né, de se fazer ouvir, de levantar a sua voz. Eu acho que nesse momento que nós estamos agora em 2023 e com o pano de fundo da guerra da Ucrânia, nós novamente estamos encontrando que há um posicionamento em que se pretende, portanto, não, a nossa voz também tem que ser ouvida, né? No entanto, essa postura, que é importante, né, que nos mostra um posicionamento crítico, por outro lado, eu diria que não vem necessariamente carregada de um conteúdo ou de uma definição política mais aprimorada, né? Se formos pensar, então, em algumas deficiências deste momento, eu diria que essa pode ser uma das questões que nós podemos encontrar de fragilidade em relação a uma postura que tenta marcar presença em relação a pressões que vêm nesse cenário atual desafiador que nós estamos vivendo. E aqui eu acho que é muito importante o que temos de pano de fundo nesse encontro, que é o pensamento de Samir Amin, né? Por quê? Não sei se quem assistiu o filme lembra que, num determinado momento, ele diz: eu estava tão otimista, e ele se refere concretamente à vitória da Revolução na China, né? Que ele disse: eu até acreditei que isso significava o fim do capitalismo, né? E a mim essa frase me ecoou muito, porque eu sou de uma geração em que, na época em que começamos a militância aqui na América Latina, nós pensávamos que éramos capazes de mudar o mundo, né? E com essa energia e essa convicção nos lançamos na luta, né? E eu vejo que essa é uma diferença significativa com este momento, porque hoje já é bem mais difícil acreditar, e sobretudo eu vejo isso nas novas gerações, que somos capazes de mudar o mundo, que somos capazes de criar uma alternativa. Já se falou até que muitos veem que seja mais factível o final da vida humana no planeta Terra do que o final do capitalismo, o que é atroz, né? E então a gente tem que pensar, se o jovem é por si um idealista, né? Por que essa diferença entre a minha geração, a geração de Samir Amin e outras mais presentes, maravilhosas que estão aqui? E aí eu acho que tem muito a ver também com Bandung, com não alinhados e com, sobretudo, a reação do capitalismo e do imperialismo a esse empoderamento, a essa voz muito forte que se fez sentir, por exemplo, alterando o conteúdo da Agenda das Nações Unidas, trazendo o tema da descolonização para dentro da ONU e trazendo algumas bandeiras muito importantes. E qual é essa resposta? Eu acho que talvez o exemplo mais significativo seja a própria Indonésia, né? Que foi a que acolheu a Conferência de Bandung. 1 milhão de mortos no massacre da derrubada do governo de Sukarno, né? E na África, o preço altíssimo que a África pagou pelo sonho da sua liberdade, né? Com os assassinatos de Eduardo Mondlane, de Samora Machel, que foi um acidente aéreo, né? Que hoje já se sabe que não foi acidente, de Lumumba, de Cabral, né? Mas na América Latina não foi diferente. Até militares que supostamente, né, estariam fora de radar, foram assassinados porque sonharam com uma América Latina diferente, como o general Juan José Torres, da Bolívia, que foi derrubado por ousar na Bolívia trazer um movimento nacionalista, dar ouvido às massas bolivianas, né? Foi derrotado, derrubado, exilado e assassinado na Argentina, junto com tantos outros, né? E a igreja, né? Uma igreja que teve um compromisso com os pobres, com a teoria da libertação, e que, a partir de João Paulo II, desmobiliza um compromisso transformador, né? E o projeto de uma igreja neopentecostal, que, evidentemente, tem muitas pessoas que eu respeito muito, mas também, de alguma forma, podemos pensar que dá uma resposta a desafios muito mais profundos, muito rasa, né? Que não aprofunda, não permite uma tomada de consciência, como em seu momento pensou-se a partir de um engajamento do mundo católico, né? Isso, então, me traz novamente, o porquê dessa diferença de gerações, né? E claro que essa brutalidade, digamos assim, da resposta ao empoderamento do terceiro mundo naquele momento tem muito a ver com essa situação que nós estamos vivendo hoje, que eu digamos assim, tem muito mais dificuldade de pensar esse futuro alternativo, mais solidário, de uma sociedade que não esteja alicerçada somente numa visão de que a realização do ser humano se dá pelos bens materiais, mas que a realização do ser humano pode se dar na fraternidade, na solidariedade, na construção coletiva de ideais comuns, né? E uma das questões que nos desafia neste momento em que a militância, o ativismo se dá muito fracionado. Temos a causa ecologista, muito importante, temos a causa do movimento antirracista, extremamente relevante. Não há sociedade humana que possa conviver com digamos assim, essa degradação que significa o racismo, esse desprezo do ser humano, né? Tem a luta cada vez mais importante das comunidades indígenas, que hoje tem aqui no Brasil, neste momento, uma vitória importante, porque acaba de ser votado o marco temporal, que era uma forma de evitar reconhecer terras ancestrais, e foi derrotado no Supremo essa iniciativa. Temos a luta das comunidades LGBT+, mas são lutas fracionadas, e talvez o que esteja faltando é que, de alguma forma, possamos, nas gerações mais velhas, mostrar em comum existe algo que é muito importante, é que todas elas estão enfrentando um sistema capitalista que, em última instância, enquanto existir, haverá racismo, haverá intolerância religiosa, haverá massacre de populações autóctones, como muito bem foi mostrado aqui com documentário, né, do movimento que começa a surgir decolonial, já o centro decolonial levantando, porque é inerente a esse sistema de dominação a intolerância da diversidade, que é a essência do ser humano, é a essência da humanidade. Então, eu diria que hoje, mais do que nunca, estão vigentes, entendo eu, duas bandeiras que levantou o movimento não alinhado, que ecoaram nas Nações Unidas e que tiveram algum sucesso. Um foi a nova ordem econômica internacional, e a outra foi a nova ordem informativa internacional. Mas o que eu vejo? Que hoje se fala muito de uma nova forma de organizar a economia. Estamos com a palavra de ordem da desdolarização, de, através dos BRICS e de outros mecanismos, ir encontrando formas de financiar projetos que não seja com o marco com que se maneja o Fundo Monetário Internacional ou o Banco Mundial, mas nada ou muito pouco se fala de uma nova ordem informativa. E eu que venho de uma experiência de quase 30 anos de jornalismo, estou convencida que esse é um dos maiores desafios que nós temos que enfrentar. Se nós não tivermos, e aqui Samir Amin foi muito lógico também, quando ele colocou a dominação da informação e da comunicação como um dos 5 mecanismos de dominação do capitalismo. Se nós não tivermos condições de levar uma informação de qualidade, com contexto, não simplificando aquilo que não é possível de ser simplificado, mas mostrando a complexidade dos fenômenos contemporâneos na sua complexidade. Se nós não tivermos uma forma de utilizar a comunicação para formar cidadãos, nós vamos continuar a sermos derrotados. Porque se somente pensarmos uma mudança na economia, mas não pensarmos na possibilidade da mudança, no posicionamento, naquilo que no documentário apareceu, a criação do homem novo. Na minha geração, a criação do homem novo era uma das grandes questões. A transformação, nós não poderíamos ser considerados bons militantes, pelo menos no meu Uruguai querido. Não éramos militantes se nós não éramos capazes de nos transformar individualmente, além de coletivamente. E nisso era muito observado o comportamento nas pequenas questões, nos pequenos detalhes. Você não pode ser um revolucionário se só tem uma boa mensagem da boca para fora e depois em casa bate na mulher, ou não deixa ela falar, ou na rua vê uma situação de racismo e fica calado ou olha para outro lado. Ou se vê uma família morando na rua e passa por cima dela como se não acontecesse, como se fossem invisíveis. E isso é que está acontecendo conosco. É tal o problema social que nós passamos por cima dos que estão dormindo na rua e não somos mais capazes de sentir que isso é intolerável, né? E eu acho que isso tem a ver muito com a maciça campanha da mídia para nos tirar do horizonte o que são os problemas reais e nos colocar um circo para que estejamos prestando atenção àquilo que nos interessa e, sobretudo, a juventude esteja muito longe de entender realmente qual poderia ser seu papel transformador. Fecho dizendo que eu acho que temos que recriar a utopia de que cada um de nós pode servir a um projeto transformador. E que esse projeto transformador tem que estar também muito vinculado à educação, e particularmente à educação pública, uma educação como a que nós defendemos aqui nesta universidade e pela qual nos batemos, né? Educação e informação são, para mim, as 2 armas que temos para voltar a criar essa ideia sem a qual todo debate é inócuo, de que somos capazes de transformar a realidade. E aí necessitamos alguns elementos, um dos quais eu acho que permeia esse debate aqui, que é a solidariedade internacional. Se nós não somos capazes de criar uma rede internacionalista que faça do problema dos palestinos nosso problema, do problema das favelas nosso problema, do problema indígena nosso problema, do problema da fome na África ou em qualquer lugar nosso problema, não vamos também suceder em transformar a realidade. A luta continua. Obrigada.
Bom, Agora, eu não sei se o Justin já chegou, né? Justin is here. So now I will present the slides. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pin Gustav. 1 second. Ah, mas quem precisa pin é quem tá ali. Max, você consegue pinar o Gustavo?
You say it's very late for him, or we appreciate it.
Yes. Vou tirar isso. Peraí. Não, eu tenho que falar. Tudo bem, mas a gente vai tirar o vídeo. Ah, não. Você vai ficar junto com ele? Well, I wanted to thank Gustav for being here. And thank you so much. I know it's already late for you, so we really appreciate you staying here the entire time. And well, I'm going to present Gustav Maciá. He's an engineer and economist. He is the founding member of CEDETIN, former president of CRIT, and former president of ATTAC, and of the International Council of the World Social Forum. And welcome, Gustav. You can start your presentation.
Speaking in French.
You will speak in French. So we have Portuguese interpretation.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je peux commencer?
1 second, 1 second. My team says it's removed already. Não consigo tirar a minha imagem.
Donc, on attend juste que la traduction dans la cabine en français s'installe. 1 minute et on commence.
Très bien, très bien.
Yeah, we need to hear him, but what we're gonna hear here is
Hello, Mahmoud.
Okay.
pode fazer, legal.
Emerson, you can start the interpretation of Gustav.
Alors, tu peux y aller, mon cher Gustave.
Bom dia a todas, a todos. Good morning. Hello, everybody. Excuse me to speak in French. Mon intervention porte sur une réflexion pour inscrire le Sud global dans une stratégie d'émancipation. Nous vivons une période d'incertitude et de fortes contradictions dont l'issue n'est pas déterminée. Depuis les révolutions des nationalités de 1848, 3 blocs politiques se disputent le pouvoir. Un capitalisme libéral, aujourd'hui converti au néolibéralisme, un capitalisme national identitaire aujourd'hui investi par les droites extrêmes, un bloc progressiste à la recherche de nouveaux repères. Le néolibéralisme, encore dominant, est confronté à la rupture écologique, aux contradictions sociales et à la montée en puissance d'un Sud global.
Excuse-nous, Gustave.
Oui,
Gustave, est-ce que
qu'est-ce qu'il y a, Aziz?
Gustave, c'est parce qu'il y a un. Excuse-nous, Gustave, est-ce que tu as un micro qui est ouvert, genre un loop ou quelque chose? On entend en double ta voix.
Ah non, moi je n'ai pas d'autre
C'est
micro.
juste parce que je t'ai en délai. Il y a un grand délai, ce qui fait qu'on t'entend 2 fois.
Non, moi je n'ai qu'un seul micro.
Donc, laisse-nous, on va essayer de.
Il n'y a pas de micro ouvert là.
C'est qu'il y a un délai quand tu parles et on t'entend 2 fois. Ta phrase est répétée 2 fois, donc ça arrive en écho.
Oui, oui, je comprends, mais à mon avis, c'est plutôt sur Zoom, non?
Emerson needs to translate.
On va juste vérifier ce qui se passe. C'est la première fois que ça arrive.
Mhm.
Et là, ce que j'entends, je l'ai déjà dit.
Et là, comme ça?
Oui. Tu arrêtes.
Non, je n'ai qu'un seul micro et il n'y a rien d'autre ouvert dans ma chambre.
Well, but
No? Mireille was working well, right?
yes, everything went well. OK. Gus, essaye de redire juste une phrase, s'il te plaît.
Alors, un capitalisme national identitaire aujourd'hui investi dans les droites extrêmes.
Ça marche.
Ça marche? Attends, j'éteins mon téléphone parce que peut-être que
This is weird.
ça.
Attends, Gus, excuse-nous.
Il y a un double écho.
When Gus have spoken, what he said was repeated. Gus, on est désolé, on a besoin de refaire un test avec toi. Juste une phrase. Vas-y, Gus, je t'en prie.
Je refais un essai? Le néolibéralisme, encore dominant, est confronté à la rupture écologique, aux contradictions sociales et à la montée en puissance du Sud global. Les droites extrêmes arrivent au pouvoir politique à partir des élections et non plus comme dans les années 1970 par des coups d'État militaires. Elles ont mené la bataille pour l'hégémonie culturelle contre l'égalité depuis 1970 et mis en avant le nationalisme, le sécuritarisme et la dénonciation des migrants. Les contradictions sociales, écologiques, politiques, idéologiques sont toujours très présentes dans chaque pays et à l'échelle mondiale. L'extrême droite occupe le devant de la scène, mais elle n'a pas encore gagné. Elle bénéficie pour l'instant de la crise aiguë que traversent les deux autres courants d'opinion. Le néolibéralisme s'est construit contre la droite classique libérale, confrontée à la décolonisation. La réponse aux crises pétrolières en 1973 et 1977 a permis une période de près de 40 ans de néocolonisation, des formes de recolonisation, à travers la crise de la dette et les plans d'ajustement structurel expérimentés au Chili, qui ont permis d'abandonner les politiques keynésiennes d'alliance avec les nouvelles bourgeoisies du Sud et les couches populaires du Nord. Cette contre-offensive va triompher avec la liquidation des régimes progressistes du Sud et la chute du mur de Berlin en 1989. Mais la crise financière de 2008 marque un coup d'arrêt dans l'avancée du capitalisme néolibéral. La rupture écologique, l'explosion des surprofits, les résistances des couches populaires ont mis en évidence les contradictions de la croissance néolibérale exacerbée par la crise de la pandémie et du climat. La crise actuelle rappelle par certains côtés celle des années 1930, une période marquée par une évolution du capitalisme avec des guerres, des changements géopolitiques, des montées d'alliances entre les droites et les extrêmes droites, une interpellation de la démocratie. La situation est marquée par la crise du capitalisme de 1929. Dans une telle situation, trois types de contradictions prennent une grande importance. La première concerne la crise du mode de production dominant, le capitalisme, avec le passage à une nouvelle phase du mode de production, fordiste et keynésien, mis en œuvre par le New Deal. La deuxième concerne la guerre et la démocratie. La troisième concerne l'élément nouveau déterminant de la rupture écologique. La nouvelle crise correspondra-t-elle au passage à une nouvelle phase du capitalisme amorcée avec les nouvelles formes de production, notamment le numérique? Le deuxième élément de la rupture, celui de la liaison entre démocratie et guerre, est moins nouveau. Il est marqué aujourd'hui par la montée des autoritarismes de différentes natures. Par contre, la phase sécuritaire du néolibéralisme depuis 2008 est accentuée par la rupture idéologique qui introduit une très grande discontinuité. La crise ouverte est une crise structurelle du capitalisme. Ce n'est pas une simple crise conjoncturelle. Elle ne se limitera peut-être pas au passage à une nouvelle phase du mode de production. Immanuel Wallerstein avance l'hypothèse qu'il s'agit d'une crise structurelle du mode de production capitaliste. Il considère que le mode de production capitaliste est épuisé et qu'il ne devrait plus être dominant dans les 30 prochaines années. Mais cette crise du capitalisme ne déboucherait pas sur le socialisme. C'est un autre mode de production inégalitaire, mais différent, qui lui succéderait. Dans cette hypothèse, le capitalisme ne disparaîtrait pas, mais il ne serait plus le mode de production dominant dans les formations sociales, un peu comme l'aristocratie n'a pas disparu en laissant la première place à la bourgeoisie. Un élément déterminant de cette crise est la montée en puissance du Sud global, qui a été analysé et théorisé d'abord par Samir Amin. Cette montée en puissance est appuyée sur les travaux sur l'accumulation à l'échelle mondiale et le développement inégal. Elle a été prolongée par la réappropriation de l'histoire longue des civilisations menée par Samir, Wallerstein, Arrighi et Frank. Elle a été prolongée par les travaux en Amérique latine sur le décolonial. La première faiblesse du courant progressiste vient de la faillite de l'utopie communiste et socialiste. La critique des régimes socialistes et communistes réellement existants, toujours nécessaires, est encore insuffisante. Et des propositions d'un nouveau projet de transformation radicale qui se différencierait d'un socialisme d'État n'ont toujours pas émergé. Cette situation renforce la crise profonde du courant progressiste à travers ses différentes composantes. C'est ce qui permet aux nouvelles droites de s'implanter dans les milieux populaires sans trop se soucier des contradictions entre leur discours populiste et leur positionnement idéologique fondé sur les inégalités et leur adhésion au capitalisme nationaliste. Il existe fort heureusement des mouvements de contestation puissants porteurs de nouvelles radicalités. Radicalité au double sens du terme, de prendre les choses à la racine et aussi de la nécessaire rupture radicale. Les mouvements sociaux en sont porteurs. Le mouvement social et le mouvement syndical, ouvrier et paysan, les mouvements féministes, antiracistes, écologistes, les mouvements des peuples premiers, des migrants, de défense des droits au logement et à la santé. Prenons l'exemple du nouveau mouvement paysan La Via Campesina, qui regroupe des millions de petits paysans dans 182 associations dans 80 pays. Elle a réussi à convaincre que l'agriculture paysanne, combinant l'écologie sociale et l'alimentation, est plus efficace et moderne que l'agro-industrie et permet la souveraineté alimentaire et la lutte contre les OGM. C'est un renversement de perspective par rapport au néolibéralisme et aux nouvelles droites. Ces mouvements sont porteurs de valeurs fondamentales et notamment de l'égalité. Ces mouvements approfondissent dans leur domaine, mais ils n'ont pas encore construit un projet d'ensemble qui propose une alternative politique par rapport au néolibéralisme et aux nouvelles droites. La prise de conscience de la rupture écologique et sociale est un élément déterminant. La pandémie du Covid est un révélateur et l'a accentué. Le climat, la biodiversité, la cohabitation des espèces interrogent le rapport entre l'espèce humaine et la nature. L'écologie s'impose comme incontournable dans la compréhension de l'évolution. La rupture écologique remet en cause les conceptions dominantes de la croissance et du développement qui sont au fondement du capitalisme. Les contradictions écologiques, sociales, démocratiques et géopolitiques renforcent l'hypothèse d'une crise de civilisation. Les mouvements sociaux révèlent que les inégalités, les injustices, les discriminations sont devenues insupportables. Les mouvements sociaux annoncent une nouvelle ère à l'échelle mondiale. Une ère analogue à celle des droits au XVIIIe siècle, à celle des nationalités en 1848, à celle des révolutions socialistes au XXe siècle, à celle de la décolonisation à partir de 1920, à celle de la contre-culture et de la libération des femmes des années 70, à celle des mouvements antiracistes et décoloniaux. Cette révolution, encore souterraine, mais dont les mouvements sociaux et citoyens massifs et répétés forment les principaux points, est portée par l'idée partagée à l'échelle mondiale que les inégalités, les injustices, l'arbitraire et la corruption sont insupportables et que la révolte pour ne plus les supporter est légitime. D'autant plus légitime qu'il s'agit de l'avenir de l'humanité elle-même, confrontée à une crise climatique et idéologique et écologique majeure que les pouvoirs en place refusent de prendre en compte. Les révoltes ne sont pas seulement des soulèvements de refus, les révoltes deviennent des révolutions quand les issues paraissent possibles. Si les inégalités et les injustices sont devenues insupportables et inacceptables, c'est aussi parce qu'un monde sans inégalité et sans injustice apparaît possible. La question de la démocratie et de l'autoritarisme est une question centrale qu'il faut approfondir. La question de la démocratie définit les chemins de la transition. Démocratie dans les entreprises, démocratie locale, démocratie dans l'action publique et dans les États, démocratie internationale. Les libertés qui peuvent être réelles ne sont pas vraiment partagées. Beaucoup en sont exclus. Cette situation repose sur les inégalités entre les pays et les peuples qui ne sont pas supportables et qui sont de moins en moins supportées. En faisant des démocraties occidentales un modèle unique et imposé, on met en danger l'idée même de la démocratie. Dans un excellent article, Kavita Krishnan pose la question: la multipolarité est-elle la mantra de l'autoritarisme? Les sociétés sont confrontées à une triple panique. Panique économique, panique identitaire, panique écologique. L'extrême droite capitalise les ressentiments contre les élites, contre ceux qui viennent d'ailleurs et contre les très pauvres qualifiés d'assistés. Le défi est de renouveler la définition des peuples, des nations et des États par rapport à la mondialisation et par rapport à la nature. À partir de 2011, les nouveaux mouvements renouvellent l'approche de la démocratie. Nous avons assisté à une succession ininterrompue de mouvements partout dans le monde. Ils sont réprimés, mais ils ouvrent de nouvelles voies. Les mouvements mettent en avant de nouvelles propositions pour la garantie des droits. Droit à la santé, droit à l'éducation, droit au revenu, qui paraissait il y a quelque temps très utopique, droit au travail, droit au service public, droit à une action publique qui n'est pas uniquement la bureaucratie et l'État, droit des communs par rapport à la propriété. Les mouvements mettent en avant une floraison extraordinaire d'idées nouvelles. Évidemment, elles ne vont pas s'imposer tout de suite. Elles sont le support de ce qui peut être un nouveau monde. La vague des mobilisations depuis 2011 a trouvé de grands espoirs. Elle n'a pas réussi à imposer des nouveaux pouvoirs et s'est heurtée à des autoritarismes violents. Elle a ouvert de nouvelles pistes. La stratégie de ces mouvements donne une grande place au local. Parmi les mouvements qui servent de référence, rappelons-nous les zapatistes, démocratie, justice, liberté, les jeunes iraniennes, femmes, vie, liberté, les Kurdes du Rojava, femmes, écologie, démocratie. La décolonisation n'est pas terminée, la réinvention de l'internationalisme commence. À la conférence de Bandung en 1955, Chouinai avait affirmé « Les États veulent leur indépendance, les nations veulent leur libération, les peuples veulent la révolution ». Les États ont gagné leur indépendance à quelques exceptions près, dont la Palestine. Mais on en voit les limites. La période ouverte est celle de la libération des nations et des peuples. Au Congrès des peuples d'Orient à Bakou en 1920, on avait assisté à la définition d'une nouvelle alliance stratégique, l'alliance entre les mouvements de libération nationale et les mouvements communistes. Jusque-là, ils se faisaient la guerre. Malgré ces divergences, l'alliance a duré 50 ans et a permis la première phase de la décolonisation, celle des indépendances. Aujourd'hui, l'alliance des droites et des extrêmes droites met en avant les nationalismes identitaires. La réponse est la construction d'un système international qui met en avant les États, les nations et les peuples. Un nouvel internationalisme qui prolonge la solidarité internationale et l'intermondialisme. La solidarité internationale et la dimension internationale de la solidarité. La discussion porte sur la définition d'une stratégie d'émancipation. La bourgeoisie avait défini une stratégie de transformation sociale, créer un parti pour conquérir l'État, pour changer la société. Après bien des débats dans la première internationale, notamment sur l'État au moment de la Commune, cette stratégie avait été confirmée par les deuxième et troisième internationales. Mais aujourd'hui, elle est remise en cause. L'État s'est révélé plus apte à construire le capitalisme et à le reproduire qu'à le dépasser. Et un parti créé pour conquérir l'État se transforme en parti-État avant même d'avoir conquis l'État. C'est ce qui explique l'importance donnée à la forme mouvement par rapport à la forme parti. L'équation de la stratégie de transformation reste à définir. Elle passe par la valeur de l'égalité qui permet de s'opposer aux valeurs de l'extrême droite, aux inégalités et aux discriminations. L'émancipation est portée par la radicalité des mouvements. D'abord, le mouvement féministe et le mouvement antiraciste, avec en position centrale le mouvement syndical, ouvrier et paysan, les peuples premiers, les migrants, l'égalité des droits. Ces mouvements suscitent des réactions très violentes, mais ils avancent. Ce qui manque, ce à quoi il faut travailler, c'est un projet commun, un projet qui permettrait de renouveler une utopie d'émancipation, un nouvel internationalisme. Tout est à construire, une approche théorique et philosophique, un projet de société, un récit mobilisateur, une stratégie et des alliances. Ce sont les tâches de la période à venir. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Gustave Massia, surtout en dépit de l'heure tardive dans laquelle tu as eu à intervenir. Nous apprécions beaucoup, beaucoup. We want to find out whether Justin is in the room, as we don't see his name, or maybe he's connecting with a different device. Justin, are you around?
Yeah, it is me, Aziz. I'm just connecting with my phone.
Yes, here is Justin. So Matt, you mind wait a bit, as thank you so much. Anyway, we're still on Squidle. So we have Justin's presentation.
Yes. So thank you so much, everyone. Right now, we're gonna present Justin. Just one sec. So
Justin Theodora is a PhD candidate of the University of Connecticut in political science.
His bio says imperialism, Eurocentrism, and historical materialism towards an Aminian articulation of the problematic of capitalist modernity. For Samir Amin, the problematics of imperialism and Eurocentrism as inseparable. Amin realized the two problematics by incorporating social historical difference, false binaries, and the superstructural factors into his theory of imperialism, despite the residual methodological internalism and subliminal Eurofetishism of Amin's theory. It is an indispensable reference for historical materialist research into capitalist Euro-modernity. Welcome, Justin. Thank you so much for being here with us. You can start your presentation.
Okay, thanks everyone. I just want to say it's a real honor for me. Is everything good? Okay.
So cut the mics.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I am good to go. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Justin, and it's a real honor for me to be able to speak with you today. I'm kind of addressing more of the academic side of things. I've long read Amin, and he was really my, gateway, as it were, and I still continue to learn a lot from him. About Marxism and about imperialism and about changing the world. So in this paper that you might have read, which was circulated, I basically make the argument that Amin developed or articulated a new problematic, that he linked the two problems of imperialism and Eurocentrism together. And that this is significant for, researchers and scholar, activist people working on the problem, the cultural problems, the problems of identity and a culture, as well as activists struggling for a world free of imperialism, capitalism, imperialism. So I begin just by laying out that Amin had a foot in both camps, that he was both a theorist of imperialism and a critic of Eurocentrism, and that his lifelong activism was really what allowed him to articulate these two problems as interconnected, and I'll go over the ways that he says that they are as I go along. So I use this concept of creolization, which is developed by Jane Gordon. It basically means the rearticulation and the amalgamation of contrasting ideologies. And so Amin didn't just, look at the political economy of imperialism. He didn't just look at the cultural critique of Eurocentrism, but he articulated both of those things in ways that allowed them to be linked together, and I would argue to develop a stronger political line from this. So basically, in terms of imperialism theory, he sort of said the level of analysis has to be historical materialist. And in terms of post-colonial theory or the critique of Eurocentrism, he said that the analysis had to be at a sociological rather than a purely cultural level. So it's a pretty basic point, but I'll go through here kind of what did Amin say in my reading about the classical theories of imperialism and how he developed his own theory of imperialism. And then how he linked this theory to the critique of Eurocentrism and sort of argued that we can't look at issues of culture and identity, including a lot of the things that woke leftism examines, without bringing in imperialism and historical materialism more broadly. So firstly, we start with, the classical theory of imperialism. We have an economic framing of the question by Hobson. Then Luxemburg introduces a kind of historical language to this. She talks about a non-capitalist social environment, talks about primitive accumulation, and she's bringing in factors that Amin will look at as well, such as the problem of difference, and such as the factors in the superstructure, which other kind of theorists of imperialism saw merely as a reflection of the base. But I would say that Luxemburg still kind of has an economic view of imperialism due to her underconsumptionism. Nevertheless, she does bring in elements of historical materialism into the analysis. And it was really with Lenin that we had the geopolitical instance, a sort of imperialism, introduced with his concept of inter-imperialist rivalry. And it's interesting to note that Lenin's disagreement with Luxemburg on the national question kind of sparked this geopolitical rearticulation of the classical theory. So we're seeing here a process of sort of internal critique and the problematic coming out, in my view. So this kind of situates Amin, and I think what I argue in the paper is that Amin faced a new set of issues and therefore rearticulated imperialism theory. The first one was the problem of underdevelopment. So the second was the peaceful coexistence that emerged between the great powers, contrary to Lenin's thesis of rivalry after the Second World War, and the emergence of the welfare state, which was, again, contrary to the kind of underconsumption thesis in other theorists of imperialism. So these sort of new sets of issues, I argue, express themselves, to Amin in his activism. So I emphasize that he was always part of political activist struggles, anti-imperialist struggles, and these were really what shaped his theory. So the problem of underdevelopment, which was central to Amin, I think, because of the debates that he had with pro-Soviet communists and revolutionary students, put the centered the periphery in his where does the periphery fit into imperialism theory? This had not been addressed by the classical theorists, and Amin developed the idea of unequal development, as many of you probably know, and working from Emmanuel's thesis of unequal exchange, Amin argued that posed the question, what are the implications of this? The implications of unequal exchange, he argued, were the main one was a disarticulated social structure in the periphery, which brought in this question of difference. Because we were looking at disarticulated versus articulated societies in the imperialist system, imperialism of the day, of Amin's day, of the post-1950s era, and probably beyond, and going back, couldn't be analyzed from a purely political economic standpoint. They had to be analyzed from a historical perspective. And So he says, there's a very nice quote where he says, relations between socioeconomic formations that differ. This, he says, must be the object of imperialism theory. And imperialism theory cannot merely be an examination of the so-called inner laws of the capitalist mode of production. So I think this is a huge shift in imperialism theory. Of what I've read of it, it's not. Amin was really path-breaking in making this shift to a historically informed analysis of different societies and the way they relate to each other. This being the core kind of terrain in which imperialism, the mechanics or the dynamics of imperialism can be unearthed. So to go into a little bit more of, so unequal development was kind of his conception of the international. So on the domestic sphere, Amin defined this articulation as the kind of outward orientation of a very modern export sector combined with a very stagnant and mostly pre-capitalist rural sector. This kind of structure, he argued, blocked the transition from pre-capitalism to capitalism in imperialized societies. And so this really not only highlighted the question of difference, but also criticized transcended the false binary between capitalism and feudalism that informed many of the both academic and political debates at the time. So as you all probably know, at the time, there was this big debate among socialists of the alliance with the national bourgeoisie or communist leadership of the national movement or anti-imperialist movement. The kind of first stance was supported by the Soviet Union, alliance with the national bourgeoisie. That was the thesis of the Zhdanov doctrine, and also the Truman doctrine coming from the US side. But basically, the idea was that Marx had said the stages go feudalism to capitalism, then to socialism. So in these underdeveloped countries where capitalism is not established, we communists have to work with the national bourgeoisie, establish capitalism, and then we can struggle with socialism. Amin rejected this. He rejected this because this linear interpretation of Marx's theory of history, he argued, was wrong. And indeed, concretely in the peripheries of his day, there was not simply feudalism transitioning to capitalism, but feudalism being blocked from becoming capitalist. Feudalism being blocked by imperialism, by unequal development, from becoming capitalist, and therefore any kind of modernization project, national rejuvenation, etc., socialism, struggle for socialism could not be under the tutelage of the national bourgeoisie, and had in fact to be more radical, had to be led by the communists in some way. It had to, there had to be the development of a new path, basically, to modernity, a non-capitalist one. So after Amin, finished studies, he worked in the Naserian bureaucracy, the bureaucracy of Nasser, and there he, witnessed what he calls the formation of a new state class. So this is a very typical experience of the developing countries in the 50s, etc. And what he sort of took from this and expressed in theoretical terms is the tendency, this is in accumulation on a world scale, but he argued that there was a tendency of state capitalism, because it exists, a tendency towards state capitalism in these peripheral societies. Because these societies are blocked from becoming capitalist, the state has to come in and basically substitute for foreign capital, has basically got to substitute for foreign capital and engineer this kind of alternative path to industrialization, modernity, and so on. And I think this is really important because this, again, brings up a very important theme that post-colonial theorists and neo-Weberian and non-Marxist critics of Eurocentrism talk about, namely the superstructure. So, but we see how this analysis of superstructure, of the state, and so on, of power, is integrated with the classical Marxist analysis of capitalism and imperialism, precisely. And so that is my sort of reading of Amin's rearticulation of imperialism theory. To summarize, Amin situated the analysis at the historical level. He analyzed aspects of difference, aspects of hybridization, and elements of the superstructure in ways that classical theorists of imperialism, Marxists, had neglected. Yet he maintained fidelity towards that whole tradition by precisely arguing that difference, that hybridity, that politics, and later we'll see a little bit more of culture too. All of these things had to be situated, were best understood when situated within the theory of capitalist or capitalism imperialism. And so in 1989, he tackles these, the post-colonial theory is really emerging and taking off in the West and elsewhere. And Amin writes this book, Eurocentrism, that really tackles these questions of culture and identity sort of directly. You know, it's already, what I'm trying to get at is that it's already implicit in how he's writing his book, Accumulation on a World Scale, and his main theory of imperialism, what he's doing. But it really comes out very clearly in Eurocentrism, I would argue. And there he argues against what he calls culturalism, which is basically the Saidian analysis, if I put it that way. He says that cultures cannot be looked at as self-contained and static. Instead, he emphasizes the syncretism of religious ideologies and insists on the comparative literature, having literature from different cultures speak to one another. He says this is a valid form of analysis, contrary to maybe Said himself. And he posits, he argues that Protestantism and Christian ideology, he conceptualizes it as a peripheral form of a general tributary ideology. So he argues that, in the pre-capitalist era, all societies were tending towards the tributary mode of production, but European societies were farther off from that idea. So the ideology corresponding to this mode of production was some sort of synthesis of faith and reason, which was perfected in the Islamic Caliphate. But as the peripheral variant, Protestantism, especially Christianity in general, Protestantism especially, it had a lot more flexibility. And he introduces this idea of this kind of, what Trotsky would call it, privilege of backwardness, this kind of thing, where the backward, is the site of revolutionary rupture with the existing state of things. For example, capitalism did not emerge in the tributary regions, but in the feudal regions of backwards Europe. So this thesis is interesting itself too, because if we look at it, what he's arguing here is that Euromodernity emerges through and because of the international interactions between feudal and more developed tributary social formation. So it's an idea, it's again against this kind of dualistic and essentialist idea of cultures that coexist but are mutually unrecognizable to one another and really don't communicate in a significant way, a substantive way, perhaps.
Justine, I'm afraid, but you need 3 minutes.
Okay, so I can sum up for sure, yeah. Let me just sum up by saying that, you know, I think the main points of my paper are that, like, Amin's rearticulation of both the critique of Eurocentrism and the critique of imperialism theory provides some kind of methodological kind of tools which we can adopt in analysis going forward, and the main ones being historical materialism as a kind of level of analysis, the proper level of analysis to examine both the dominance of European culture, Euromodernity, and the workings of imperialism, and also, yeah, that would be, I think, and also the need, the development of concepts that, like unequal development, that allow phenomena like both, the underdevelopment and the hegemony, cultural hegemony of the West to be related to one another. That's really the core of my paper. And it's really, I think, lastly, and probably most importantly, I think what this kind of analysis does, and what I think he does, he reframes the periphery in his historical readings of history as active rather than passive. So by developing a kind of historical materialism from below, kind of peripherocentric historical materialism, we can really look at not just how imperialism blocked peripheral social forces, but how they responded to that blockage successfully to varying extents. And this, I think, would be quite informative for anti-imperialist struggles today. So yeah, that is my paper. Thank you so much again. I hope it was somewhat informative, and I welcome any questions, comments, participants, and the rest of it.
Thank you.
There is no sound. There is no sound at all.
Your mic is not. Your mic is open. Your mic.
Is it?
Are you on Zoom also?
No, that's
No.
what should I get on Zoom here? No.
Now it's
Tá com som? Você tá ouvindo? So, people, are you listening? Have you managed to listen Matt's introduction? In Portuguese channel? Para mim funcionou. It's working. So you're listening both the Portuguese interpretation and the original audio that I'm now speaking in English, right? Everyone is listening.
No.
No.
Yeah. But it would.
So perhaps Vicio has?
So why don't you present PowerPoint straight? So you just share.
Or if I
You
get on
have
the
it
Zoom.
online?
No, I just have it on.
Can you share via AirDrop with me, this one?
Sure. How would I do that? So I've never used AirDrop.
See connected or I don't get. You are on the Zoom already?
No, that's what I was saying. Maybe I should just get on the Zoom and then share my screen or something.
But the fact that you
Yeah,
can
perhaps
speak,
it's better.
you're going to equal.
No. He can use his own stuff. So where we put a new one?
Home?
Can
I
you?
don't know. Honestly.
Yes,
Join.
join. So the
Oh, I got it.
it's there. 892. So we're just fixing because he's gonna share a PowerPoint. Okay. Good. So thank you so much for the interpreters and everyone in the audience for your patience. We're getting it done. Estamos resolvendo. It's there. Oh, PowerPoint, it's there.
Oh, we're good?
We're
Okay.
good.
But can they see it as well? On the
No,
Can you pin or project or share
the
this?
people on the web don't see it
Wait a second.
unless you project from the screen. See what I mean?
Yes, they have to project this one. Eles têm que compartilhar aquela tela, gente.
okay, so I won't join this.
No.
Okay.
It's okay. You can talk here. Aha, now it's working. So I hope you have listened to my presentation of Matt. He's gonna do the presentation now. Feel free to ask to pass whenever
Great.
you need.
Yeah.
And there is simultaneous interpretation for both languages, English or Portuguese. So feel free to speak whatever.
Perfect. I'll speak English if that's all right. And thank you so much to the organizers. Thank you so much for this amazing conference and the invitation. Thanks to the International Workers and People for making this all possible. Thank you also to my fellow panelists. For those who might not know, the Progressive International was founded during the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020 with the mission to unite, organize, and mobilize progressive forces from across the world. So member organizations include major trade unions like the Central Única dos Trabalhadores, SACUCI, here in Brazil, the Central de Trabajadoras y Trabajadores de la Argentina in Argentina, the Unión Sindical Obrera de la Industria del Petróleo in Colombia, social movements like the Women's Democratic Front in Pakistan, the National Alliance of People's Movements in India, the MTST here in Brazil, peasant movements such as MVWATA in Tanzania or the MKSS in India, and political parties such as Partido Libre in Honduras, the governing party of President Xiomara Castro, or Convergencia Social, the governing party of Gabriel Boric in Chile. We're directed by a global council that includes leaders such as Silvia Federici, Kohei Seitu, Stephen Ruvuga, President Gustavo Petro, here from Brazil, Monica Valente, and also MPs like Jeremy Corbyn, Zero Santana, and here in Brazil, Guilherme Boulos. And many more. This is just a brief overview of who we are and I'll get into more about what the Progressive International is and how we are moving forward. But just to get right into it, I was asked to answer some version of the question, can a world internationalist organization or a united front of progressive organizations overcome the divisions of the left and take up the challenge of organizing workers and peoples of the world? So in 2020, the first council of the Progressive International drafted a political declaration outlining principles to orient the organization and to define its course. Go ahead. Or too fast.
Yeah, it's a little too fast. Cues for the, because
Ah,
they are sharing
okay.
like this. Is it correct or should
Yes,
they?
that's good.
Yes,
Yeah.
cool. So feel free, like you can.
Okay.
Fast.
Great. Okay, so
Sorry.
you can go to the next one. One more. I'll slow down also. So many of these points of the declaration go right to the heart of the question posed to me today and speak to the necessity of international organization. There are 25 points in total, which I will not go into all of them. But for the sake of this conversation today, I wanted to highlight 9 in particular, addressing both key principles and methods of the Progressive International's organizing. So we start from the principle of essentially internationalism or extinction. So I'll just read these. The crises of our century threaten the extinction of all life in all nations across all continents. Internationalism is not a luxury, it's a strategy for survival. So I think we are all in agreement here that the converging crises of global capitalism are more urgent than ever. And from climate, imperialism, war, economic crises, the list goes on, and they are now beginning to converge in previously unseen ways. We believe we cannot defeat them in isolation. So I can go to the next slide. Second, peoples of the world organize. We are workers, peasants, peoples of the world rising up against the reactionary forces of authoritarian capitalism and oligarchy. Our aim is international organization, to combine forces across borders in order to reclaim the planet as our own. Again, this speaks to building liberatory popular power from the working classes. You can go next slide. Fourth, we build infrastructure. Our mandate is to build the infrastructure for internationalism. The progressive forces remain fragmented. While wealth and power consolidate around the world, we build the scaffolding of a planetary front with the strength to fight and win. And so I think this is an important point to highlight in this discussion about internationalism, because one of the things that I think is somewhat unique about the Progressive International is the secretariat, which people like me who keep this running on a full-time to part-time basis. We're a small team of about 15 people around the world. But this is really what sustains and moves forward the International on a daily basis through the minute tasks of emailing and organizing and the not so fun stuff. Next. Unity, not conformity. We seek unity through shared struggle. The present crisis demands the strategic alliance of all progressive forces. But coordination does not require submission. We aim to build a broad coalition while making space for creative contention inside. This speaks to the Progressive International's commitment to pragmatic unity through struggle to develop into more programmatic unity and trust. Our bet is essentially that struggle builds unity and builds political understanding and trust. Next, please. Yeah, here you can see that this was written obviously during 2020. Capitalism is the virus. We aspire to eradicate capitalism everywhere. We believe that exploitation, dispossession, and environmental destruction are written into the genetic code of capitalism. We do not support efforts to save this system, nor enable its expansion to all corners of the earth. I mean, this is quite simple, but just to say we are anti-capitalist and we fight for socialism. Next, internationalism means anti-imperialism. Our internationalism stands against imperialism in all its forms, from war and sanctions to privatization and structural adjustment. We believe that these are not only tools of domination by some nations over others, they are also the tools of division to set the peoples of the world against each other. And this is just simply to say that we're anti-imperialists who believe in the full liberation of the global South from imperialist Northern domination. And we believe that this is one of the central tasks of our age. There's only several more here. Dialogue is, oh, next, please. Dialogue is not enough. Our aim is collective action. We are not satisfied with setting up a social network. Our activities prepare us for planetary mobilization, matching the scales of our crises to the scales of the actions that we mount against them. And this is to say that forums, summits, symposia, networks, these are all critically important, and they have sustained the internationalist movement for a very long time. But our urgent aim and priority is towards organizing towards collective action. And this is where we put our emphasis. Next, please. From each and to each. Our model of membership, the way we work with organizations is simple. From each according to their ability and to each according to need. We expect members to participate in the construction of our common front in whichever ways they can. And we strive to support members in all the ways that their struggle demands. So this is just to say that we adhere to the Marxist aspiration of to each according to their ability and from each or to each according to their need. Finally, there's one more. And this is that solidarity is not a slogan. So I've skipped over a lot here. There's some that are, there's many that attack racism head on, sexism, etc. But I just wanted to highlight these 9. We believe that solidarity is an action. The expression of sympathy for our allies is common. Our task is to recognize their struggle as our own, to organize our communities to take part in that struggle, and to join forces across borders in a common defense of people and planet. And this is just to say that solidarity by tweet, I think, as we've become accustomed to, is not enough. How can we bring international solidarity into the material world and away from just a simple statement with Palestine or a declaration or even worse, an Instagram post with Palestine? And we do a lot of that as well. But this is, it's important for us to think about how we can bring this into the real material world. So I've tried to lay out a few of these topics, answering the question, these points, answering the question that was posed from the perspective of our organization, how this internationalist organization can take shape. But I also wanted to take up the last task of how we actually make solidarity more than a slogan, in a few examples of what we do, getting into actually how we work. So yes, thank you. Here are some of the examples of our initiatives, but I wanted to jump over to the next slide to talk about first the Make Amazon Pay campaign. So this was a transnational strike organized for the first time in 2020 with over 40 trade unions, especially Uni Global Union, which is a service workers union, and was also joined by other social movements, campaign groups, workers' organizations, and NGOs that first conceived of a common set of demands emerging straight from Amazon workers themselves and workers in the supply chain, I should say. This is very important because, you know, Amazon has a footprint that stretches across the globe. The supply chains of Amazon reach every country in the world, even if the Amazon warehouse with the Amazon package only may appear in, well, that's not even true anymore, but are predominantly in the global north. Now they're entering Brazil as well. Now they're entering Chile, Colombia, Nigeria, South Africa, other parts of Southeast Asia. So this is expanding, but the supply chain has always been. So these common demands were signed by over 25,000 people in the first week. And as I said, unions representing millions of workers across the globe. And we then deployed an alliance of 400 MPs from over 34 countries to take forward these demands in legislation in their own countries as well. So since its launch in 2020, the Make Amazon Pay campaign has become even stronger. And in 2022, the coalition will hold its, in 2022, the coalition held its first global day of action in a transnational strike with over 140 strike actions in over 35 countries. This is now expanding this year for 2023, and we hope to expand it every year. This year also, the campaign will be organizing its first physical meeting of unionists from from call centers in the Philippines, garment workers in Cambodia and Bangladesh, gig workers and delivery drivers from Latin America, actual Amazon warehouse workers in Europe and the United States, to bring together all of these forces together with the parliamentarians I mentioned in Manchester in next month, actually, almost a month from today. So that's one way we organize, organizing workers, building popular power, building the capacity to strike at capital transnationally. Another is something we've called the observatory. And this is something that I've done a lot of work on personally, and I won't go too much into it because I think it's one of our more visible parts of work, especially for folks in Latin America. This was never anyone on the Secretariat's idea. This came directly from the MAS in Bolivia, the movement towards socialism. If pushing back the coup government in the election, what ended up being the election of Luis Arce, President Luis Arce, requested that the Progressive International send a delegation to defend popular sovereignty in Bolivia against the interference of specifically the United States and the Organization of American States, which I believe Fidel Castro called the Department of the Colonies of the United States. Which is exactly what it is. So in elections from Colombia, Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, Honduras, Peru, Chile, Guatemala, also in some other places like Slovenia or Hungary, we have deployed this strategy of pushing back US imperialism by defending popular projects at the ballot box. And defending them through sort of their own logic of liberal democracy and popular sovereignty, but of course always with an anti-imperialist lens and with an eye to that end. So we can move on. The next one I want to talk about is something that's called the Union for Vaccine Internationalism. And this again was formed in the midst of the COVID pandemic with the clear absence of a forum for progressive governments to strategize an alternative to being held hostage by the North, essentially. We have convened a summit with national governments of Argentina, Mexico, Bolivia, Cuba, and Venezuela, as well as regional governments such as Kisumu in Kenya and Kerala in India, where political leaders from over 20 countries, healthcare workers, even some vaccine manufacturers, small vaccine manufacturers, not Moderna or Pfizer, but small manufacturers in Argentina or Canada, Bolivia and beyond, as well as public health experts. And over 4 days of public and private meetings, concrete commitments to advance vaccine internationalism were made, namely, one, the open collaboration of COVID-19 vaccine technologies among the countries with national vaccine candidates. So those were Cuba and Mexico, who developed their own vaccines without any support from foreign governments. Two, affordable prices for these vaccines. Three, the sharing of regulatory capacity to approve these vaccines for domestic use in the countries convened. Four, pooling manufacturing capacity, especially in Argentina, to ramp up vaccine and medical equipment production of these vaccines. And finally, a commitment to collective disobedience to challenge big pharma monopolies enforced through the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And this resulted not only in several of these commitments coming to pass, but also our push to create a bridge for the rest of the world for Cuba's 3 different vaccines that have now all been approved and have all been wildly successful. So traveling to Cuba with health experts to publicly broadcast the scientific studies of the efficacy of these vaccines for potential manufacturers, purchasers, regulators, and medical journals across the world to help the expedition of those vaccines. You can move on. And finally, and I think most importantly, and most in keeping with this conference today, the new international economic order commemorating 50 years from 1974 now to 2020 or to 2024 next year. So in December 2022, PI convened UN ambassadors, government ministers, popular leaders from Latin America, Asia, the Caribbean, across the world to an event in New York to debate the past and future of the NIEO. This was last year, so with 48 years. This launch event concluded with an invitation from the Cuban delegation to continue this dialogue in Havana and to coincide with Cuba's assumption this year in January of the G77 presidency. Over the course of its deliberations, this Congress then ended up happening in January, we're calling it the Havana Congress on the new international economic order, yielded a strategy to assert Southern power and build a planetary bloc set out in the declaration delivered at the closing ceremony. While not the only resolutions, I think these were 2 of the most impactful, and I just want to project them here. I won't necessarily read all of them, but next slide, please. So, or maybe I just will read them for the benefit of everyone. So one is to assert Southern power. The Congress recognizes that economic liberation will not be granted, but must be seized. As the original call for a new international economic order was won through the exercise of collective power in the coordinated production of petroleum, so our vision today can only be realized through the collective action of the South and the formation of new and alternative institutions to share critical technology, tackle sovereign debt, drive development finance, face future pandemics together, as well as coordinate positions on international climate action and the protection of national sovereignty over the extraction of natural resources. And also to build a planetary bloc. The Congress calls on all peoples and nations of the world to join in the struggle to definitively achieve the new international economic order, to build a planetary bloc led by the South and reinforced by the solidarities of the North, whose peoples recognize their obligation to resist the crimes committed in their names and to bring the spirit of this Havana Congress into the communities that we call home. So this, I forgot to mention that this Congress was attended by senators, government representatives, diplomats from all across the world, especially Latin America. The president of Cuba was in attendance, as was the foreign minister. So this was not, sorry, to just set the stage a bit, that it wasn't just, me and a few people sitting in a room, but real people with mandates and democratic authority from their people. And out of this Congress, we formed a special NIEO working group of economists, policymakers, G77 diplomats, with a clear view of 3 main areas. 1, driving technology transfers. 2, designing an investment regime for Southern needs. And 3, building a club for debtor solidarity, building a debtors club of nations to potentially act together in joint action against their creditors. This working group has continued, and we have just convened with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, the South-North Dialogues, the first edition of the South-North Dialogues in Brussels will now be moving on to Addis Ababa and other cities later on this year. We're working directly with the G77 to develop a science, technology, and innovation summit, especially around this idea of technology transfers. in early 2024, Kerala will host the next phase of diplomatic deliberations toward a new UN declaration for an actual 50th commemoration of the new international economic order. And to conclude, to wrap up, the Progressive International's work is grounded in this defense of sovereignty and the protagonism of popular and working class movements, especially in the South. And I would contend that these components now more than ever are foundational, indispensable components that must be at the heart of our internationalist project or any internationalist project. Because if a Southern government can simply be overthrown, if it can be severed from the international banking system with illegal sanctions, if its health policy toolkit can be locked and blackmailed by Northern corporations through mechanisms like ICSID, TRIPS, structural adjustments, invasion, violent war, all the mechanisms we're familiar with, then it's virtually futile to debate transformative policy prescriptions in this setting. History has shown us that the imperialists and the imperialist powers, above all the United States, will not flinch to crush Southern movements that disrupt the extraction of value from South to North. Andres Arauz, who's now running, a council member of the Progressive International, now running for the vice presidency in Ecuador, formerly the presidency, recently made the point at the Havana Congress that it is illegal in terms of international law to pose an alternative to hegemonic capitalism. It's illegal to pose even an alternative under international law. This is the depths of neoliberalism and imperialism that we find ourselves in. So until we can find a new strategic framework for sovereign development, one through popular struggle, both nationally, but also regionally in regional integration projects like UNASUR, like the African Union, like so many others, the horizon for winning any gains towards the construction of socialism will remain unacceptably restrictive. And so I just want to close with one final quote from a writer, Max Ale, who's considering specifically climate action, but I think it's important and sets the stage for how we view things, about the necessity of pairing the struggles for popular power and sovereignty. This comes from his book, People's Green New Deal. But the struggle requires complementary and interlacing South-North struggles to open political space for and prevent reprisals against Southern states which nationalize their productive plants, put in place humane wages, widen the scope of national control over productive forces, and ensure popular classes within the nation are the ones to exercise that control through increased social power. Sovereignty must be strengthened because states are necessary vehicles for popular interest at our current historical moment. This is especially the case when it comes to climate, for which legal covenants take the state as central. Countries cannot demand, let alone receive, climate reparations until they act freely and collectively on the world stage to get them. From the South, that means national popular environmentalism of the poor and eco-socialism. From the North, it means acknowledging and struggling against state violation of Southern self-determination. And without this, it's not meaningful to discuss debt payments, climate reparation payments to Southern countries when the governments and sovereignty of those countries are not even respected, those that are owed those debts. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. Sorry for the less academic presentation and more of just a what we do presentation, but.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. It was super inspiring. Thank you. Thank you so much. So right now, if it's okay to take the presentation, I'm gonna present our next speaker, who unfortunately would not be able to make his own speech. So he shared his speech with me, and I'll be dictating the speech. The screen. I don't know, it's only Aziz that has, so he sent it to me via email, and I'm gonna read. I already share it with the interpreters so they can help with the translation. So only hearing, right? Yes, I'm gonna try to see if I can share here. 1 second. Because I have it here somewhere. Just 1 sec. And if anyone can, please let me know if the interpretation channel is working of both Portuguese and French. And in a second, I'm gonna be opening our the speech of our panelists, and I'm gonna share the screen with you so everyone can see. I think it will be better. Also better for me to read, right? So please let me know in the chat if it's working, if the interpretation is working, because I'm gonna be speaking in English and we need to know if the interpretation in Portuguese is working. Yes? Cool. So I'm gonna share it now. 1 second. Alguém consegue ouvir it's working? Cool. So cool. So here it's gonna be the speech. Yeah? Can you see? Perfect. Cool. So just before I start his presentation, I'm gonna do a quick introduction of who is he. Just for a second, I think it might be better to show like that. Yes. So, oh, I'm appearing there. Okay. So Dimitris Konstantakopoulos, that's his surname. He's a journalist, writer, editor of defenddemocracy.press, former advisor to the Greek PM Andreas Papandreou on East-West relations, and former member of the Secretariat of CC of Syriza, right? So basically, his entire speech is going to talk about the necessity of a new transitional program for a fifth international. A new transitional program to show the way from the present sinking capitalist civilization to a new world order, which will guarantee the survival and flourishing of humanity and will lay the basis for uniting the struggles and the needs of the peoples of the South, of the West, and of the East, and also provide us with a comprehensive and inclusive answer to the different problems we are facing: ecological, social, democratic, geopolitical, and many others. So Dimitri says, shortly before his death, in a series of writings, Samir Amin unfolded the two issues that mainly concerned him. One was the non-subjection of China to financial globalization, that is, to the totalitarian power of a world finance capital. The second was the need to build a fifth international. We had been to China together, and he and Samir Amin, of course, and he remembers Samir Amin immensely anxiety on this subject. On the day he woke him up and asked him to urgently go to his room as he was interviewed on a Chinese television to describe to the Chinese public what he had experienced in Moscow, watching as a journalist to the collapse of the Soviet regime and the restoration of a capitalist relations of production and distribution. He feared that Beijing might, in some turn of its so sui generis evolution, make a decisive turn towards capitalism, and wanted to inoculate the Chinese in advance. Samir did not believe that the Chinese regime is a socialist one. I will not say China is socialist. I will not say China is capitalist, he said in a speech at a prestigious University of Peking. Sometimes he thought that there might be a way to state capitalism, state socialism, and finally socialism. If China fully acceded to the global capitalist system and its hierarchy, it would face enormous problems itself, but it would also decisively reinforce a state of fast-clothing, hyper-imperialist system. the one we all saw in the war, with the war in Ukraine. Today, all the states of the collective West, with the exception perhaps of Turkey, in a very limited form Hungary, are acting in a blatant opposition to their most elementary national interests. Turkey is an exception. It belongs half to the West and half to the periphery of the planet. It is not, of course, in any way an anti-imperialist force. Still, it disposes of a considerable degree of independence, using it in order to negotiate a privileged status in the ranks of Western imperialism. Western nation states are rapidly being transformed into mere tools of super imperialism, while all democratic institutions being now rapidly controlled by the big international finance capital and devoid of any national and democratic character. In the principal capitalist countries, there is still a remnant of the type of bourgeois democracy, but increasingly it has no content. How a road to socialism can be reopened after the distortions and defeats of the 21st century is certainly an open question. But in order for such a path to be open, it is necessary at the same time to close the path to the further strengthening of the rapidly evolving totalitarian Western capitalism, with the collusive possibilities offered to it by modern technological forces. And this has become possible today thanks to the resistance of the peoples of Yugoslavia and the Middle East, thanks to the social struggles in Europe and Latin America, thanks to the return of Russia to world politics, thanks to the fantastic economic rise of China. That is why every revolutionary Marxist, wherever he comes from the South, from the East, or the West of our continent, must be resolutely against Western imperialist interventions, and not be led astray by the humanitarian and democratic pretexts used by Western imperialism. None of their interventions brought democracy. All of them led to social and national disasters in the country where they took place. The first duty of every conscious militant of the left today is the opposition to imperialist wars and sanctions. This certainly does not mean unconditional support for the regimes that are attacked every time by imperialism, be it Serbia or Afghanistan, Iraq or Iran, Russia or China. It means an understanding of what the total domination of the West on the planet would mean for human civilization and for the very survival of the human species. Today, the emergence of the BRICS, the moves towards a multipolar world, and the weakening of the role of the dollar are paving the way for a new democratic world order. These are huge historic steps, but it is only the necessary, not the sufficient condition for a new world order. Our problem should not be a question of defeating the Western world in order to take its place, but of moving all of humanity towards a new civilization that can face the enormous threats that have appeared for the first time in human history, due to the productive forces and technologies we have developed and which, if not controlled, threaten the very survival of humans. The West does not have the means to defeat the emerging majority of humanity, but in its efforts not to lose its global dominance, it can proceed with policies that can blow up humanity with the means of mass destruction, a danger inherent in the adventuristic policies towards Russia and China. But even if that doesn't happen, the climate crisis is fast moving, with neither the West nor the alternative powers doing anything about the most serious threat that had appeared in the history of humankind, even more dangerous than the nuclear war. Because nuclear war may or may not happen, but the climate change is coming with certainty, not with probability, and humans will not survive it. They have to stop it, but in order to stop it, they need another social system and another civilization. That is, even if we avoid the catastrophe of a world war, we risk finding ourselves in an environment of destruction due to a prolonged stalemate. If Rosa Luxemburg proclaimed a century ago, socialism or barbarism, today the question is socialism or extermination. Struggling to the top to stop the climate change, we struggle for socialism. Struggling for socialism, we struggle to save the planet. None of the big problems humanity is facing can be addressed now on a national or regional level. This is one of the reasons we badly need an international. The problems he mentioned above and other such issues cannot be solved solely by the action of states which are opposed to the dominant Western powers. These states are, by the way, mostly conservative and just aim at the West, leaving them alone and not interfering in their affairs, which is impossible because imperialism is the nature of capitalism. Also, it is impossible to address the problems of humanity that humanity is facing nowadays only by states. We need the conscious mobilization of vast popular masses in both North and the South of the planet. We need also an alliance of Western popular classes and the oppressed nations of the South, and a mobilization of peoples all over the world. Such an alliance means addressing simultaneously socioeconomic, geopolitical, ecological problems in the direction of a nationally, regionally, and globally planned and democratically controlled economy. This should be our strategic goal. You cannot nowadays address the ecological but not the social but not the geopolitical but not the social. We need the Fifth International for a variety of reasons, to unite the regions of the world on the basis of a new socialist project, because without such unity, war will become unavoidable. We need also to unite and coordinate the struggles against capitalism, against imperialism, against totalitarianism, against climate change, and the degradation of nature. We cannot, for example, phase out the use of fossil fuels without taking into account the different positions of different countries, etc., etc. The question of the planning becomes synonymous with any progress. So to close, in the light of the experience of the 20th century, we cannot contain ourselves to the state ownership of the productive forces, but we need social ownership and control through the extensive use of methods of self-management. Socialism does not mean state ownership. It means the exercise of power by the people at all levels. It also means that we must rethink the pursuit of the constant perpetual development of the productive forces. For some ideas as to what this alternative transitional program of a Fifth International should be, he refers to a text of his, which asks some of these questions. I will share his text in the chat, and I thank you everyone for being here and listening. So thank you so much, everyone. It was so impressive to read that, because while I was reading, I was like thinking how impactful that is and how much needed it is to update some of the most striking needs that humanity needs. And we still learn a lot from socialist struggles all over the world, but it is a huge challenge to put together all the complexities of all crises we are facing into something that we can all work together to fight and perhaps build a different world, or worlds, right, in the plural. So I don't know right now if we should open for comments or if we should pass for the... So we have Aziz, that he's here for a long time, since the beginning. I'm gonna introduce him. I'm so sorry. So no need for being brief. So Aziz Salman Fall is a political scientist, president of the SIRFA Internationalist Center and coordinator of the international campaign Justice for Sankara. And in his presentation, he will mention the world system in the 21st century, resilience, and the response to the challenge. Aziz, you're welcome, and feel free to make your presentation now. Perhaps you should stay here to use the... Yours? Yes, I think it's better. Oh, you're gonna read here. Okay. You can sit here.
Okay, so I will try to be brief as everyone is tired. So, Emerson, je vais parler en français et tu vas traduire en portugais. Is Emerson hearing? Emerson, are you alive behind the door?
Let me see here.
Oui,
Yeah?
merci Emerson. Muito obrigado, Emerson. Je sais que nous avons eu une très grande journée et j'ai une pensée pour tous nos camarades de l'International des travailleurs et des peuples qui n'ont pas pu venir avec nous. Parce que c'est très frustrant de ne pas pouvoir se rencontrer physiquement. Il y en a qui ne se sont jamais vus, mais qui se connaissent. Et depuis quelques années, depuis la mort de Samir, nous essayons de nous voir. Et ce symposium est une première tentative, malgré différents efforts, de se voir. Et nous avons eu le plaisir et l'honneur de recevoir aussi Matt Kierkegaard de Progressive International comme invité spécial. Et nous avions normalement prévu d'avoir l'International People Assembly avec Vijay Pachat qui devait se joindre à nous et c'est probablement partie remise. Alors, mon sujet est très vaste, mais comme la plupart des présentations, it's feedback, hein?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was trying to put the Portuguese interpretation so that people can follow.
Yeah, so I have to speak low.
Perhaps what you can do is to speak and just wait to translate, and then you continue so that people can listen instead of simultaneous interpretation. No, it can be simultaneous, but because we will be listening here,
But I can speak low.
Yeah.
Si je parle très doucement, est-ce que tu m'entends? Emerson, si je parle à ce niveau-là, eux, ils ne m'entendent pas, mais si je parle à ce niveau, OK, ça va? Yes.
On entend.
Donc, on va continuer. C'est toujours le
Là, on
problème
entend.
de l'internationalisme. C'est une tour de Babel. Les membres de mon centre, le Centre internationaliste, sont allés à la guerre d'Espagne. Et parmi eux, il y avait Norman Bethune, que vous connaissez peut-être, Norman Bethune, qui va se retrouver aussi en Chine. Et à l'époque de la guerre civile espagnole, les communistes, anarchistes, socialistes qui allaient là venaient de différents pays et ils ne se comprenaient pas. Mais ils avaient un langage universel en commun, qui était l'internationalisme. Et donc, c'est dans cette perspective internationaliste que je propose de faire un renouveau théorique des concepts qui expliquent la nature du système monde. Alors, les théories du système monde, pour ceux qui sont familiers, c'est des théories de Fernand Braudel, Samir Amin, Polanyi, Thorstein, en fait, un certain nombre d'analystes comme Arrighi, Wallerstein et Barry Giles, qui fait partie de notre groupe aussi, André Gunder-Frank. Donc, il y a différentes écoles de pensée pour périodiser le système monde. Donc, soit on considère que la modernité a existé depuis très longtemps, c'est-à-dire que dans l'Antiquité, vous aviez des sociétés qui connaissaient la modernité, mais elles n'étaient pas séparées de la métaphysique. Par exemple, les kémétiques égyptiens connaissaient l'astronomie, la chirurgie, les sciences exactes, mais avec un cachet religieux. Nous n'avons pas la capacité de refaire leurs architectures. C'est un peu comme les Incas aujourd'hui. Vous avez le mur des Incas et le mur des incapables. Donc, il faut regarder avec humilité le temps du système monde dans la durée. Et surtout dans une perspective non eurocentrique. Alors, dans mes écrits, j'essaie de montrer en fait qu'il y a un grand malentendu. Ce malentendu dans la grille du système monde, j'essaie de l'exprimer par un concept que j'appelle le mégalo-ensemble. Alors, le concept de mégalo-ensemble, c'est un concept qui explique le système de reproduction du capitalisme à partir de Entwicklung, c'est-à-dire le développement. C'est l'adoption quasi universelle de la stratégie et des modèles de développement qui étaient considérés neutres au début et qui va petit à petit avoir des adjectifs et des épithètes amélioratifs qui va en fait permettre la diffusion et l'expansion de l'économie mondialisée. Malgré des systèmes politiques différents, il va y avoir un grand effet attracteur. Et c'est un effet attracteur des périphéries vers les centres. Ça va permettre la globalisation de l'État-nation. Ça va permettre le marché dit autorégulé. Et c'est pour ça que la confusion entre le concept d'économie de marché et celui du capitalisme est une grave erreur. Le marché n'est pas le capitalisme, qui est un système qui est basé sur la concurrence de la propriété privée. Et comme le montrait Samir Amin, le marché et le capitalisme réellement existant doit être compris dans le mode de production. Alors, c'est le marché des produits du travail social, le marché des capitaux et le marché du travail. Et le marché du travail, c'est celui qui n'a pas une libre circulation du capital humain, puisque la migration, elle est contenue. Mais aussi, c'est dans cette disposition, comme l'a montré Mireille Fanon, que le racisme hiérarchise les formes du capital humain. Après cela, pour ceux qui ont étudié en sciences politiques, il y a ce qu'on appelle les superstructures. Et ces superstructures sont des superstructures de gouvernementalité. Elles ont été intériorisées et elles sont reproduites presque automatiquement par les États. Et il y a la dimension culturelle, c'est l'aliénation. Elle fonctionne par l'hégémonie. La caractéristique de l'hégémonie, c'est qu'elle donne l'impression qu'on peut homogénéiser le monde. Mais en réalité, le monde crée une aspiration Mais tout le monde ne peut pas avoir un iPhone ou un iPad. Mais vous allez avoir l'aspiration. Et une petite catégorie aura accès à cela. Alors, c'est ce mégalo-ensemble qui va être au début des élites blanches, locodermes blanches, qui va s'élargir à travers le monde par les classes bourgeoises. Bien sûr, il faut associer à ça des éléments comme la bureaucratie, la mode, l'obsolescence, le triage des moyens de communication. Tout cela se fait dans l'accélération. Et cette accélération, elle est parallèle à ce qu'on appelle l'atomisation des individus. Donc, on a une société de plus en plus individualiste. Et donc, il y a une inscription dans la psyché collective d'un mode de reproduction culturelle symbolique du capitalisme. Et la conséquence, c'est que tous les ismes, donc capitalisme, libéralisme, socialisme, toutes les utopies sont capturées par le mode de développement, qui n'est pas neutre. Parce que comme le montre Ritz, le développement, c'est tout simplement la production de marchandises en vue de l'échange et qui va détruire les relations sociales et qui va détruire l'environnement pour répondre à la demande solvable. C'est tout simplement ça le développement dans le capitalisme. Donc, pour moi, le développement, c'est aussi un problème. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut travailler la colonialité du développement. Alors, je n'ai pas le temps de vous expliquer tout le phénomène, mais je vais expliquer un deuxième concept que j'appelle le supra-impérialisme. Alors, supra, ça veut dire que c'est au-dessus. Et ça fonctionne par des vecteurs oligopolistiques. Un peu comme un iceberg, vous voyez seulement la tête de l'iceberg. Et il provoque une dévastation du monde. Parce que les objectifs restent toujours le même, c'est-à-dire le contrôle des marchés, le pillage des ressources naturelles et la surexploitation des ressources humaines, de la main-d'œuvre, de la périphérie. C'est ce que Amin a appelé la loi de la valeur mondialisée, qui fournit une rente capitaliste. Alors, c'est important parce que ici, c'est la question de Alors, ça fonctionne par la financiarisation. Alors, il y a des mots bizarres comme tritrisation. Et c'est un processus d'accumulation du capital où les marchés financiers ont deux fonctions. Emprunter aux fins de l'achat et de la vente des marchandises. Et assurer la croissance des actifs, des dividendes, des stock options, qui sont des montages financiers qui profitent à un groupe très restreint de financiers. Et tous les actionnaires, les gens qui ont des hypothèques, qui ont des portefeuilles, attendent un retour sur investissement. Donc, on peut dire qu'il y a un impérialisme collectif de la triade qui profite de ce supra-impérialisme. Et il faut bien sûr étudier la place de la Chine dans ce processus en changement. Dans mon étude, vous verrez que j'explique en fait la nature de l'économie du socialisme de marché. Mais je crois que Harvey a raison de dire qu'on est aussi, comme dans tous les autres mécanismes, dans une accumulation par dépossession. Et cette accumulation par dépossession, elle ne remplace pas l'accumulation primitive, mais Samir Amin a montré qu'il se reproduit par 5 monopoles. Le monopole dans les technologies, le monopole dans les flux financiers et les institutions financières, le monopole dans l'accès aux ressources naturelles de la planète, le monopole des moyens de communication et finalement le monopole de la destruction massive. C'est ce phénomène qui permet la polarisation du monde en centre et périphérie. Mais si on étudie bien, on voit que pour qu'un pays du Sud puisse se développer, il faut qu'il puisse maîtriser. Il faut qu'il puisse maîtriser les éléments de son accumulation. Et paradoxalement, ce sont les mêmes éléments que les monopoles des pays du centre qu'il doit maîtriser chez lui. Mais comment le faire lorsque le système monde est une pyramide? Alors, pour vous donner une idée de la pyramide, c'est 1% des plus riches de la planète correspondent à 2 fois la richesse de 90% de la population mondiale. Ça veut dire 6,9 milliards de personnes, presque 7 milliards. Les milliardaires du monde entier, on pourrait les mettre dans la cour de l'Institut. Ils sont 2153 personnes. Et ces 2153 personnes, ils possèdent la richesse de plus de 4,6 milliards de personnes. Ce qui veut dire à peu près 60% de la population mondiale. C'est ça la nature du monde dans lequel on vit. C'est brutal. C'est un apartheid mondial dans lequel les hommes détiennent 50% de plus de richesse que les femmes. Et on a vu durant la période de la pandémie comment les femmes et les plus vulnérables étaient essentielles lorsque la production s'est arrêtée. Donc, Je n'ai pas le temps de développer le vecteur de comment les firmes multinationales, à partir des travaux de Christian Palois ou de Charles-Albert Michalet ou de la CNUSET, montrent la vitesse de la propagation des firmes transnationales. Dans les 10 dernières années, les indices de zone économique spéciale ou zone franche, il y en a plus de 5000 aujourd'hui. C'est les zones qui permettent les investissements directs où les firmes multinationales ne payent pas l'eau, l'électricité et peuvent prospérer. Donc, le coût social, le coût humain, le coût environnemental est tragique. C'est pour ça que nous proposons de redécouvrir devant cette plutocratie la question d'un trans-internationalisme. Alors, j'appelle trans-internationalisme le fait que sur l'échelle globale, l'internationalisme lui-même se retrouve devant une situation où la nation, l'État-nation, est dépassé. Que le dispositif transnational est tellement puissant qu'on doit imaginer l'internationalisme du 21e siècle dans une autre façon de voir. Comme l'a montré Matt, il y a une convergence des luttes de tout ce qui provoque des contradictions antisystémiques. Elles viennent d'abord du Sud global. Si on ne règle pas ces contradictions dans le Sud global, l'impérialisme va continuer à se reproduire. Et c'est pour ça que nous proposons une formule plus audacieuse qui dépasse celle des non-alignés et qui doit défendre la question des biens communs. Et c'est la défense des biens communs qui va être le test de ce qu'on peut encore sauver dans le 21e siècle. Par exemple, l'eau, l'espace, la mer, les gènes, la biodiversité et les choses qu'on ne peut pas acheter comme l'amour, comme le bonheur, qui sont des conceptions culturelles, mais qui peuvent être concrétisées pour la multitude. Donc, c'est un peu l'objet de nos efforts. Notre effort, c'est comment nous allons transmettre et en même temps, comment nous empruntons l'avenir aux jeunes. C'est une drôle d'équation, c'est que nous devons transmettre et les jeunes ne veulent plus accepter la hiérarchie, l'autorité et blâment notre génération d'avoir précipité l'humanité dans l'impasse. Mais ce n'est pas qu'une question de génération, nous sommes dans le même bateau. Et la caractéristique principale de l'internationalisme, c'est qu'elle est éternellement jeune. Et donc, il faut bien faire attention aux jeunes de comprendre qu'il faut qu'ils apprennent à faire du feu avec des cailloux, même s'ils utilisent un micro-ondes, parce que la plupart d'entre eux ne savent pas faire une allumette au phosphore, ni expliquer comment le micro-ondes fonctionne. Et donc, c'est l'explication que l'échelle humaine de l'évolution doit avoir humilité de se rendre compte qu'on ne peut pas réinventer la roue. Les solutions existent. C'est la volonté politique. La volonté politique. Et les masses conscientes, éduquées, qui s'arment de science jusqu'aux dents. C'est la science désaliénée, la science qui a gardé une part d'humanité, non pas la science transhumaniste, parce que la tentation transhumaniste avec l'intelligence artificielle, elle est là. Et la tentation des jeunes, c'est de vouloir aller vers ça. Mais c'est le système capitaliste qui crée ce système cybernétique. Et l'équation va être comment éviter le transhumanisme dans l'internationalisme. Nous allons normalement mourir avant vous. C'est la seule chose qu'on a en égalité. On naît et on meurt. Et c'est surprenant que le capitalisme n'explique pas que l'égalité est la chose qu'il faut concrétiser. Et dans un pays comme le Brésil, la question de l'égalité, elle est toujours aussi fondamentale. Elle est dans la structure systémique de la classe, elle est dans la structure systémique de la distribution du travail et du capital. L'Afrique du Sud, comme le Brésil, sont des microcosmes du système monde. Je veux finir ma présentation sur l'importance de l'institut dans lequel nous sommes. Le travail d'une éducation publique tournée sur le progrès social. Et notre reconnaissance d'être aujourd'hui capable de tenir un événement dans un lieu comme celui-ci. S'il a survécu à 2 siècles de capitalisme, il faut qu'on lui assure 2 autres siècles de survie. Et pour ça, il faut le rénover physiquement comme bâtiment et que donc tout le monde y contribue. C'est-à-dire qu'on comprenne le patrimoine des personnes historiques qui sont passées par cette école et qui ont fait le Brésil d'aujourd'hui. Et la dette que les gens lui doivent pour rénover le bâtiment, mais aussi rénover le savoir scientifique. Voilà pourquoi l'internationalisme, c'est vraiment la résistance collective de la communauté humaine, de la race humaine et de la conception animiste. Comme nous autres Africains, nous avons une conception animiste, ce qu'on appelle vulgairement l'écologie. Que l'être humain n'est qu'un maillon de la complexité de la nature. Il ne maîtrise pas la nature, il fait partie de la nature. Et la culture qu'il provoque, donc la culture capitaliste, c'est ça qui détruit la nature. Et donc, c'est cette logique de l'ordre marchand qui fait que le marché, aujourd'hui, a encastré les sociétés. Normalement, dans chaque société, vous avez un marché. Maintenant, comme l'a montré Polanyi, c'est le contraire. C'est la société qui est encadrée dans le marché. Ça veut dire que tout est marchandisable. Tout. Il n'y a plus une chose qui n'est plus une marchandise. Et c'est contre cette accumulation capitaliste et contre cette asymétrie que nous croyons que si les organisations que nous représentons sont capables de fusionner, nous irons vers une 5e internationale. Peut-être que nous ne la verrons pas de notre vivant. Mais je suis sûr que Victoria, Gabriela et tous les camarades du projet décolonial utiliseront l'échelle qu'on a utilisée pour y arriver. Merci. Bien, bien, bien. So, le mot de la fin, Beatriz, por favor.
Bom, eu queria dizer que...
Oh, one second.
Wait. You need to
Okay, yes.
It's taking you, and why is it taking you? Oh, it's because it's me? Okay.
No?
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's
Yeah.
it's leftist. It's too leftist. Why is not taking your?
I don't know.
Why is not taking? It's always on me and not on her.
No, on both of us, because
Yes. It's there.
But
But if you look here, it's
Okay.
good.
okay,
Okay.
no problem.
as long as the people see me.
Yeah. Bom, um pouquinho em português, outro pouquinho em inglês. É chegado o momento de dar fecho a esse evento que acho que marcou, né? It is the moment to put an end, to finalize this event, but this event will be in our heart, in our minds, for a long time. Como vicediretora deste instituto, como professora, como lutadora por uma educação pública, me sinto profundamente emocionada de ter este espaço aberto para os temas que temos tratado no dia de hoje. I think that I will just translate as is,
No, I
that
understand.
I'm
I
very
understand.
proud to be at this moment. Ok. Então, sem muitas delongas, porque eu sei que estamos aqui desde cedinho de manhã, muitos dos queridos alunos que possibilitaram este momento, porque sem eles não teríamos chegado aqui, nem almoçaram, nem saíram daqui, acho que nem foram ao banheiro, para que tudo desse certo, né? E eu acho que uma reflexão sobre a necessidade de voltar a sonhar com o internacionalismo é muito necessário, né? A essa altura do sistema capitalista, quem pode imaginar que um país sozinho, que um povo sozinho consiga mudar as regras do jogo? Não é possível. Não é possível. E para poder sermos internacionalistas, eu acho que o evento de hoje mostrou que temos que nos conhecer, né? Temos que nos conhecer, porque no fundo, todos temos as mesmas aspirações. Como dizia o discurso inicial, lá em Bandung, em 1955, de Sukarno, como anfitrião daquela magnífica conferência, temos muito mais em comum do que imaginamos, e é isso que nós temos que realmente priorizar. Sempre haverá algum detalhe que vai nos dividir. Mas se a gente foca no que nos divide, nunca seremos verdadeiros internacionalistas. Nós temos que focar no que nos une. E, sobretudo, nos une uma rejeição profunda à injustiça social, ao racismo, à dominação colonial, ao desrespeito ao ser humano. E nos une a vontade e o sonho de que isso é possível de ser transformado numa sociedade que podemos chamar de socialista, que podemos chamar de humanista, que podemos dar nomes diferentes, mas que no fundo sabemos o que é. É uma sociedade em que sejamos todos tratados como merecemos ser tratados, com dignidade, igualdade, respeito às nossas diferenças, dentro, evidentemente, de um marco legal definido coletivamente. Então, a minha mensagem final é essa. O meu orgulho de estar aqui nesta casa, neste Brasil que me acolheu como segunda pátria, mas que é primeira e segunda pátria em meu coração, sem deixar de lado meu querido Uruguai, né? Antes de mais nada, eu acho que hoje aprendemos que somos latino-americanos, africanos, asiáticos e, sobretudo, seres humanos. Obrigada por este dia memorável e let's continue. Vamos continuar, porque, como eu disse, como disseram aqueles africanos nos anos 50, a luta continua e nos esperam várias lutas, todas elas muito desafiadoras, mas confiemos na nossa capacidade de transformar esta realidade. Muito obrigada.
Okay, Emerson, we need to thank all the people who have helped to make this possible. Our comrade Emerson from afar, from Recife, who made all the way.
Thank you, Theo.
To say that Emerson is also a poet, and tomorrow he has a recital. It would be great if you can join. Emerson, por favor, please.
Vamos fazer propaganda desse evento amanhã.
Before that, so I need
Poesia. Eu faço parte do projeto poético em Recife, que é algo extremamente forte. Vocês não podem imaginar como é.
Vem aqui, Emerson, senta aqui.
Okay. À côté de Aziz Kelonão. Então, caros amigos, eu faço parte do movimento poético de Recife, que é algo extremamente vigoroso, e que vem das periferias, vem dos bairros populares, e produzindo grandes poetas, que eu diria, inscrevem seus nomes na grande literatura brasileira. Gente como Valmir Jordão, como Lucas Marafo, gente como Miró, que nos deixou há alguns meses. São poetas de grandíssimo talento. Eu sou um bagrinho no meio deles, mas faço parte desse movimento, claro. E aproveitando essa vinda para cá, eu estou em contato com o sobrinho neto de Augusto dos Anjos. Eu sou nascido na Paraíba e influenciado pela poesia de Augusto dos Anjos, né? Um grande poeta que sobreviveu graças às classes populares. E somente graças às classes populares, porque a elite o rejeitou. Então, eu estou em contato com o sobrinho neto do Augusto dos Anjos. Então, foi ele que deu a ideia de façamos um sarau, já que você vai estar aqui no Rio. Só que ele teve um acidente, seria na casa dele, ele teve um acidente, quebrou o joelho, não pôde fazer na casa dele, mas o bar simplesmente, em Santa Teresa, bar simplesmente na Pascoal Carlos Magno, resolveu acolher o evento. Venham, então eu espero que vocês virão. Amanhã, a partir das 19h30, poesia, tá? Eu cultivo o soneto, vou logo dizendo.
Santa Teresa,
Bar simplesmente, na rua Pascal Carlos Magno. Eu mandei já o convite, vocês espero que tenham recebido, né? E eu vou mandar ver no soneto, que é uma forma que existe desde 1280, mas que continua. As pessoas gostam de fazer soneto, inventam, criam em cima dele, mas a gente faz soneto. Não faço só soneto, não, mas faço muito soneto. Ok? Obrigado.
Bom, declaramos encerrada a nossa longa, mas magnífica sessão.
Muito obrigada.
So I need to say that I came to Brazil and I saw a woman who looked like my mother in the room, and it's the same age.
Here.
Yes, look at how she looked like my mother.
Mira, o Amin diz que
Você lembra muito a mãe dele.
Yes, look. No, not this lady. This lady here. Yes, this lady. It's my mother.